Cloudstar was jolted awake by a terrible clattering noise. He was curled on the trunk of one of the fallen trees enclosed by leaves that dangled limply as they died with the broken branches. He sprang up and peered over the top of his makeshift den. In the harsh dawnlight, the remains of Skyland's former border looked ravaged and horrifying. Shattered trees lay everywhere, with the brown earth churned up around them like an open wound. Cloudstar looked widely at the line of trees still standing behind him. Were two legs destroying even more of the territory? But those trees were standing as tall as ever. Through their branches trembled with the noise. Cloudstar looked back at the devastation and saw one of the fallen trees quivering as if it was trying to make its way back into the forest. With a jerk, it started to slide along the ground in a din of scraping bark and snapping branches. Cloudstar realized it was being dragged on a long silver treadmill, attached to a yellow monster whose paws scrabbled at the mud as it tried to get a grip on the slippery leaf mulch. Slowly, the tree was hauled away from its stricken companions till it disappeared behind one of the huge mounds of earth. There was a volley of two-leg shouts, and another yellow monster crawled forward, trailing a silver treadmill that was bound tightly around the trunk of the next tree. But somehow this didn't seem as troubling as the devastation of the trees in the first place. And the two legs are leaving the standing trees alone today. Perhaps they have destroyed as many as they want. Cloudstar jumped down to set fresh border marks on the trunks of the trees still standing, and ran back into the woods. When he entered camp, Mondstadt met him. She looked as if she hadn't slept for a moon. Her fur stood on end, and was littered with scraps of dirt, and her eyes were huge and bulging. "Have they destroyed more trees?" she demanded, as soon as Cloudstar wriggled free from the brambles. "Not today," he reported. "The two legs seem to be moving the trees. They pushed down yesterday." Mondstadt's eyes narrowed. "Moving them? Where? Why?" Cloudstar headed for his den, longing to wash the dust from his fur. "How am I supposed to know?" he snapped. "It's bad enough having two legs troubling our borders. I'm not going to start knowing how the brains work." He pushed his way into his den and flopped into his nest. Mondstadt followed him and hovered at the edge of the quiet, shadowy space. "I'm sorry," she mewed. "I know we'll never understand the ways of two legs, but if we could just figure out what they're doing, we might know how much danger we're in." Cloudstar looked at her. "Have you received any more omens?" He was reluctantly starting to acknowledge the headless and wingless prey as warning of what was happening now. Mondstadt blinked. "No more omens, but my dreams are full of darkness and falling trees and the screams of kids." She shuddered as she spoke, and Cloudstar felt a stab of pity for his gentle, intuitive medicine cat. "I think all our dreams will be like this for a while," he murmured. "Let me rest for a bit. Tell Buzzardstar to get on with organizing patrols. We'll hunt as normal. Tell him." He tucked his nose beneath his tail and closed his eyes. He listened to Mondstadt pad softly out of the den. Cloudstar barely dozed off when Stouffer woke him up, prodding him with one paw. "Sorry to disturb you, Cloudstar," he mewed. "Buzzardtail asked me to lead a border patrol, but with the 3 apprentices out of action, I need you to make up the numbers." Cloudstar hauled himself stiffly out of the nest and stretched each leg in return. "Okay," he meowed. "Let's go." He let Stouffer take the lead and walked beside Quailheart and Rainleaf as they headed to the dense trees that lay between the camp and the border with ThunderClan. The yellow monsters rumbled in the distance, and where the ground was bare of leaf mulch, Cloudstar could feel the earth trembling beneath his paws. Where are they taking the trees, and why? The cats were used to the fir trees being harvested by two legs, but not the trees that shed their leaves in the coldest seasons. Stouffer directed Rainleaf to refresh the first border mark. they came to, on a tree stump covered with ivy. At the next, a twisted hazel tree, Stouffer nodded to Cloudstar, offering him the task. Cloudstar stepped forward, enjoying the role of a warrior rather than leader. He was about to rejoin the patrol when a hiss through the bracken stopped him. "Patrolling the borders again, Cloudstar." The bracken rustled, and a dark ginger Tama stepped through. "Seatbelt told me she'd seen you here recently. Is SkyClan lacking in warriors?" Cloudstar forced his fur to stay flat. "There's no reason why a clan leader shouldn't patrol with his warriors," he growled. "After all, isn't that what you're doing here, Redstar?" The ThunderClan leader flicked his tail as if he was bored of the subject and padded forward until he was almost muzzle to muzzle with Cloudstar. "What's all the noise we hear coming from your territory?" he asked, leaning close to peer into Cloudstar's eyes. Is there trouble in SkyClan?" His yellow eyes gleamed hungrily. Behind him, Cloudstar heard Quail heart snarl. No trouble at all," Cloudstar replied. "Just on two legs, playing with monsters. Beyond the far boundary, my clanmates know better than to fret about every little thing a two-leg does." "Is the noise making your warriors nervous, Redstar?" The ThunderClan leader curled his lip, and Cloudstar felt a small stab of satisfaction that he had gotten under Redstar's fur. "Nothing scares ThunderClan warriors," Redstar growled. Cloudstar turned to leave. "If they have any sense, they should be more wary of SkyClan warriors." He called over his shoulder. His clanmates fell in behind him as he stalked away from the hazel tree, leaving Redstar glaring after them. Once out of sight of the ThunderClan cat, Cloudstar stepped off the path to let Stouffer take the lead again. The orange and white Tom looked anxious. "Don't you think you should have told Redstar the truth?" he meowed. "That our borders have been destroyed, we have lost territory?" Cloudstar stared at him. "Have moths gotten into your brain? Why would I let ThunderClan know there is anything wrong?" Stouffer scraped one paw over the ground. "Because if the two legs destroy much more of the forest, we might need ThunderClan's help. ThunderClan warriors can't chase off two legs and monsters," Rainleaf snapped. "I'd rather die than ask them for help." Cloudstar twitched his ears. "That's a little extreme, Rainleaf, but you're right. SkyClan will fight its own battles." "What about the territory that used to belong to us?" Stouffer persisted, nodding toward the dense strip of oak trees just beyond the SkyClan scent marks. "If we lose much more from the far side of our hunting grounds, we should ask ThunderClan to give it back." Cloudstar bristled. "SkyClan can survive without it. I will never go groveling to Redstar to get us out of trouble, and we can't go back on Duststar's decision. To let them have that territory would be like challenging all our ancestors as well as the warrior code." He gazed down at each of his warriors, in turn wincing at their troubled eyes and ruffled pelts. "I have to stay strong for them. SkyClan will survive. Without the help of ThunderClan, we are strong, skillful, and more honorable than any of the 5 clans of the forest. Trust me, warriors, the two legs will not destroy our home." By the time they returned to camp, the sun was high, blazing down through the trees. Cloudstar headed straight for the stream at the edge of the camp, just beyond the elder's den. He took a long drink. His pelt felt itchy and dusty, and his legs ached, but he had insisted on double-checking all the border marks. He didn't trust Redstar. Cloudstar was beginning to fear he had been too relaxed about letting ThunderClan warriors cross the border by a few paw steps, in the interest of keeping things peaceful with their closest neighbor. Now, he wanted to maintain a much stricter border, with frequent patrols and marks refreshed 3 times a day, not just twice. Padding back into the clearing, Cloudstar's belly rumbled. He trotted over to the fresh kill pile and stopped short with a yelp of dismay. There was only a tough-looking starling and the remains of a vole under the elderflower tree. "Haven't the hunting patrols returned yet?" he called to Weasel Whisker, who was sunning himself on the tree stump in the center of the clearing. Weasel Whisker lifted his head and peered over the edge of the stump. "Yes, and gone it again," he reported. "And this is all they caught?" Cloudstar exclaimed. Weasel Whisker nodded. they said. The woods where the trees have fallen are empty, and the rest of the territory is so noisy that prey is being frightened away from there as well. Cloudstar cursed under his breath. I'll go out myself, he told Weasel Whisker. Perhaps one cat alone would have a better chance of stalking nervous prey. Ignoring the pangs in his belly, he turned away from the first kill pile and headed back into the woods. The trees hummed with the noise of the yellow monsters. It drowned out the rustling of the leaves, the creaking of branches, and any sound of birds or squirrels that might offer good hunting. Cloudstar felt a worm of alarm squirm in his belly. There must be something we can eat. Suddenly, feeling impatient at being trapped on the ground, he leaped up the trunk of the closest tree and hauled himself into the branches. He could still hear the monsters up here, but now the leaves whispered around his ears, and a soft breeze lifted his fur. Cloudstar pressed his ear to the bark and listened to the tiniest scratching sound. Squirrel! Lifting his head, he waited for a moment, opening his jaws so the scents of the forest flitted in. His prey was farther up the tree, on one of the thinnest branches. Skyclan warriors tended to avoid hunting at the top of the trees because it was more dangerous, with the branches much less able to bear their weight, but hunger quelled Cloudstar's nerves. He clawed his way upward, stretching his tail behind him to keep his balance. There was a desperate scrabble above him as the squirrel spotted Cloudstar launching himself up, but Cloudstar put an extra burst of speed and slammed one of his front paws into the tiny fluffy creature before it had a chance to run. He studied his catch disappointedly. It was hardly old enough to be out of its nest, and it wouldn't feed an elder, let alone a warrior, but it was a start. Peering down through the leaves, Cloudstar carefully dropped the squirrel between the branches, then scampered down the trunk to bury it beneath a heap of earth and twigs until he collected it later. He hunted until the sunbeams slanted low through the trees and the first star appeared in the hazy sky. He was exhausted, his coat ruffled and filthy, and the stiffness along his spine had sharpened to a fierce burn. But all he had to add to his squirrel was a blackbird, plump enough but hardly a good meal for more than 2 cats. Unearthing the squirrel, Cloudstar dragged his fresh kill back to the camp. Birdfly was waiting for him on the far side of the brambles. Where have you been? Weasel Whisker said you went out hunting on your own. I've already eaten. Cloudstar nodded. Let me put these on the first kill pile. Let's eat together. I've already eaten. Birdfly meowed. I'm sorry. I should have saved you some for you. Cloudstar was about to protest when his gaze fell on the pile beneath the elderflower. There were a few scraps that might have been a vole he had seen earlier, but nothing else. He spun around to face Birdfly. Has every cat eaten? She flinched at his fierce tone. I think so, she mewed. Butterfly shared hers with Hazelwing and the kits. She said she wasn't hungry. Cloudstar curled his lips. She said that before. Birdfly's eyes widened. You don't think she's deliberating letting the other cats eat her share? Cloudstar nodded. But if there isn't enough food to go around, we'll have to all go hungry for a while, just until the prey comes back. Buzzardtail, he called to his deputy, who was sharing tongues with Fernpelt outside the warrior's den. From now on, we'll eat once a day, at dusk. There isn't enough prey for 2 meals a day. Buzzardtail looked startled. We'll starve. No, we won't, Cloudstar snapped, finding the panic rising inside his chest. We'll survive on 1 meal during Leaf Bear. Why should this be any different? Because we need to eat more in the warm seasons in order to survive, Leaf Bear, Buzzardtail pointed out. We won't have the strength to hunt if we're hungry all the time. We'll figure out a different way to hunt, Cloudstar hissed. He whirled around and stalked to his den. They looked to me for answers, but how am I supposed to conjure prey out of an empty forest? There were soft paw steps behind him, and Birdfly followed him into the den. Cloudstar, I'm worried about you. Well, I'm worried about everyone, Cloudstar muttered, circling in his nest to find the moss. That's your duty as our leader, Birdfoot mewed. But I just have to worry about you and our kids. When they come, Cloudstar, they need their father. If you work yourself to death before they arrive, I'll have to raise them alone. Please, take care of yourself for their sake, if nothing else. Cloudstar reached out and rested his muzzle on Birdfoot's shoulder. I'm sorry, I will look after myself, I promise. And the rest of the clan, everything will be fine when the monsters leave and the prey comes back. Birdfoot squeezed in beside him. Cloudstar shuffled to the edge of the nest to make room for a swollen belly. Do you really believe SkyClan will survive this? Birdfoot murmured as she settled against him. Of course, Cloudstar purred. StarClan would have not made me leader if they did not know for certain that I would be able to save my clan. Now sleep, my precious. Our kids need us both to be strong. Cloudstar stood at the edge of the great rock, washed in silver moonlight, and gazed down at the cats below. Countless pairs of eyes gleamed up at him, ears pricked. The only sound, the whispering of the leaves from the 4 great oaks. How long have the 5 clans gathered here? Cloudstar wondered. How long will they continue until the 2 legs destroy all these trees as well? There was a quiet cough from the foot of the rock, and Cloudstar saw Buzzardtail looking expectantly at him. 3 sunrises had passed since Cloudstar and their apprentices were caught in the falling tree, and the 2 legs had encroached no farther into SkyClan's territory. Instead, they had cleared the ruined trees away and started to place rows of large gray stones, sharp and square, in the empty spaces. There was still too much noise, and the prey had not yet returned, leaving SkyClan thin and hungry on reduced fresh kill. But Cloudstar felt a stirring of hope that the worst was over. He had wanted to say nothing about the 2 legs at the gathering, and let the other clans believe that all was well in SkyClan. But Buzzardtail insisted that he had to acknowledge that there was something going on. They knew that the noise of the yellow monsters had reached ThunderClan. It was impossible that BirdClan hadn't heard something too. Better to acknowledge that what the two legs are doing, Buzzardtail had argued, than let the rumors spread among the other clans. Greenleaf held sway in the forest, whitening the trees with glossy green leaves and plummeting the prey. The other clans reported overflowing fresh kill piles, healthy litters of kits, and new warriors who look as strong and sharp as their seniors. Cloudstar pictured the scant pile of food beneath the elderflower bush, the scrawny elders in the wails of Hazelwing's kits when their bellies ached with hunger. Scraping his claws over the silver stone, he lifted his head. Cats of all the clans, I am proud to speak for the SkyClan cats. Hazelwing's kits continue to grow and are wearing us all with their games. There was a purr of amusement from below, mostly from the she-cats and elders. I look forward to presenting them to you as apprentices in 3 more moons. My warriors are hunting with great skill for their clanmates, and like you're grateful for the fresh kill that Greenleaf brings to the forest. He paused and took a breath. Stay calm. Don't let them see that you are worried. One tiny whisker about what is happening. I'm sure some of you have heard the rumbling of 2 legs and their monsters just beyond the border. There was nods and murmurs from below the rock, and Cloudstar felt Red Star stiffen beside him. Well, 2 legs are always trying to ruin something. Cloudstar's throat ached as he tried to keep his tone light. They've taken few trees at their edge of our territory, but we have plenty more. The 2 legs will get bored soon and take their monsters somewhere else. He narrowed his eyes and tried to meet the gaze of as many warriors as possible from the other clans. We in SkyClan would hate for you to waste your time on rumors and lies about what may be going on in our territory. Cloudstars let an edge creep into his tone. But then he caught sight of Buzzardtail looking alarmed and softened his voice a little. I don't want to seem like I am trying to hide something, and by the next gathering, I hope to even have better news. Kids of my own, thanks to Birdflight. There were mutters of approval. Cloudstars hoped he had distracted the cats from gossiping about two-leg nonsense. He stepped back from the edge of the rock and sat down again. Redstar leaned over and murmured in his ear, glad to hear that SkyClan doesn't mind sharing their territory with two legs. Cloudstars shot a fierce glance at the Ginger Tom and reminded himself with an effort that this was the night of the full moon, so hostility between the clans was forbidden. Of course we aren't sharing our territory with two legs, he meowed, opening his eyes as wide as if surprised that Redstar would have such a mouse-brain idea. Our borders are strong, and our scent marks refreshed as usual. More often than usual, I've noticed, Redstar commented, with the tiniest flick of his tail. Cloudstar was saved from replying by Swiftsstar, the Wind Clan leader, standing up and stretching each leg in return. I'm getting too old to sit on this cold rock for long, he grunted. Shall we join the others? Cloudstar, Shadow Clan, and Birchstar of River Clan nodded and jumped side by side down from the great rock. Birchstar looked plump and content beneath her glossy pelt, and even Dawnstar looked less lean than usual. Cloudstar made a deliberate effort to fluff up his fur to hide his jutting ribs. In spite of his promise to Birdflight, he had been eating less than any of his warriors. The prey will come back before our kids arrive, he told himself. Fawnstep was waiting for him at the foot of the rock. Cloudstar, can we talk? Her blue eyes looked anxious. Cloudstar followed her into the shadows behind the stone. As the other medicine cats, Fawnstep told him, her voice trembling. They've all had dreams about us, about SkyClan being swallowed up by yellow monsters, trampled like dust beneath the falling trees. Molpot of ShadowClan is convinced we'll all be gone. We'll all be dead before the next gathering. Molpot of ShadowClan should worry more about his own warriors and less about sticking his muzzle into other clans' businesses, growled Cloudstar. He's no better than a gossiping elder. He can hardly take care of his own pelt, let alone an entire clan. But the others listen to him, Fawnstep persisted, and they are all worried about SkyClan. Cloudstar raised his head. Do they live in our camp? Have they seen our hunter patrols working tirelessly to find enough food for us? Do they know that the trees have been stopped falling? Or have you told them we are starving to death, crippled by two legs and pathetic monsters? His voice was harsher than intended, and Fawnstep winced. I have told them that we are fine and we can take care of ourselves, she mewed sharply. I would never tell them anything else. Cloudstar felt a stab of guilt for doubting his medicine cat. I know you wouldn't. I'm sorry. Now let's join the others before we feel more gossip from our neighbors. It was a strain to stay cheerful and seem interested in what was going on in the other clans, and Cloudstar was relieved. When cats began slipping away from the hollow in search of a brief rest before dawn, he led his clanmates back along the river at a run, wrinkling his nose at the stench of ThunderClan scent marks at the edge of the shore. SkyClan was allowed to follow the edge of the water to reach Fortress, but Redstar seemed determined to keep them trapped on the pebbles by a wall of reeking scent. Quailheart met them just inside the brambles. His eyes were full of sorrow. It's Petalfall, he meowed, as soon as Cloudstar and Fawnstep emerged from the thorns. She's had another falling fit. She's so weak she can hardly open her eyes. Fawnstep and Cloudstar ran to the medicine cat's den. The old she-cat lay in a faint moonbeam that flittered through the branches above her. Her rose-cream pelt was stretched tight over her jutting hip bones. Her eyes were sunken into her skull. The scent of death clung to her fur, and Her breath rattled in her chest. She raised her head when Cloudstar and Fawnstep entered, and opened her mouth to speak, but suddenly her whole body stiffened. Her legs shot out, her eyes rolled back, she started to tremble, and foam bubbled at her lips. Fawnstep crouched beside her. "It's all right, Petalfall," she soothed. It will be over soon." A high-pitched moan came from between Petalfall's clenched teeth. "Bring me 2 poppy seeds." Fawnstep meowed to Quailheart. The Tom hurried to the store, and Cloudstar hunkered down beside the sick cat. 2 poppy seeds, he queried. "Is that safe?" He knew that 1 poppy seed was usually all Fawnstep would allow a cat to eat. Fawnstep didn't take her eyes from Petalfall's wretched, shaking body. "Would you rather she kept having these terrible fits? If I can keep her in a deep sleep, she'll have a chance to rest and regain her strength." Cloudstar looked down at the sharp bones that seemed about to pierce the old cat's bone. It didn't seem to him that Petalfall had a whisker of strength left in her fragile body. She needed food more than sleep, but the clan couldn't give her that. Cloudstar swallowed the urge to yell in despair. Slowly, Petalfall stopped shaking. Cloudstar drew his tail softly over her flank. "Everything's fine, Petalfall. Rest now." The old cat blinked, and one faded blue eye focused on Cloudstar. "Don't lie to me, Cloudstar," she rasped, so quietly that Cloudstar had to bend closer. He winced at the stench of her breath, and hoped she hadn't noticed. "I may be old, but I'm not dumb," Petalfall croaked. "I know we are in great trouble. Oh, my poor clan, we have survived so much, yet now we will be destroyed by 2 legs. No, Petalfall!" Cloudstar mewed in her ear. "SkyClan cats can still survive this." The clouded eyes swiveled to hold his gaze with a stony glare. "Promise me, Cloudstar," the old cat wheezed. "Promise me you will not let the 2 legs drive us from our home. I promise." Cloudstar whispered. "This is where SkyClan belongs for as long as I have my 9 lives. We will never leave the forest."